Hi, I'm Anthony for Sydney Backyard Veggies. Today is the 13th of July and I am going to make a start on my spring plantings by starting off my tomato seedlings today. I do like to get an early start on my tomato seedlings. Want them to get planted out by mid-August in my patch. And so today's video I'm going to show you what varieties I'm going to be growing and how I start these seedlings off. In my gardening context, I like to get my tomatoes in early. We don't suffer much frost here in my local area here in Sydney, so I'm happy to get my tomatoes started and planted out in the garden in about mid-August. And the trick for me in doing that is it allows me to harvest a lot of my fruit before the fruit flies turn up in my area in that mid-December time. I like to do at least 2 plants of tomatoes in my patch, one in August and a second one in late December, early January. In terms of varieties, I have a strong preference for commercial hybrids. I do find that they grow more vigorous than heirloom varieties, and they're also a lot more disease resistant. In terms of specific varieties I grow in my patch, for the last 4 years I have been growing Dankia. This is a medium-sized slicing tomato and it produces amazingly, and it's actually an early producer. I find in my patch I can get the first tomatoes off the vines in that mid-November time. Produces a lot and it produces consistently, same uniform shaped tomatoes, and it produces well until the fruit flies turn up in that late December period. The second tomato slicing variety I grow is Thunder. Now Thunder is very similar to Dankia in the sense that it's a medium-sized slicing tomato. I find that the Thunder fruit is slightly larger than the Dankia, but not as bountiful in its harvest. But you get more tomatoes out of Dankia than you do Thunder. This year I'm going to be trying a new variety of ox hearts. I found this online. I said I'll give it a go. I always like to try new varieties in my patch. This one is called Arandillo. Again, another commercial hybrid. Haven't tried it yet, but I've heard good reviews on it. I'm going to give it a go in my patch. I also like to plant out a cherry tomato. The variety I like to go for is Sugarino. Haven't got any seeds at the moment, but I've got some on order and I'll be getting them started soon. These get really big. They get very big and very bushy, and I find that you constantly need to prune these tomatoes. But once they start producing, they produce for weeks and big gluts of fresh cherry tomatoes. They do really well when you terrace them along a bamboo trellis system that I've used in previous videos, and it just holds the plants together and lets them just waterfall over the bamboo, so it makes it easy for you to harvest their fruit. In my garden, I've already started quarantining areas where I want to start planting my spring tomatoes. In the left back section of my main patch, already added all my fertilizer and all my compost in that area, and I'll be planting that space out in that early August period. So today I'm going to be starting my 3 varieties of tomatoes. I'm going to be starting Dankia, Thunder and Arandillo, and I will be starting my Farahs and my Sugarinos over the next week. Now with my tomatoes, I grow a number of plantings throughout the season. I like to get started early, now in early mid-July, because I like to beat the fruit flies that turn up in our patch in about late December, early January. Planting my tomatoes early allows me to get ahead of the game, harvest the fruit before the damage comes through. When it comes to punnets, I like to go for a larger soil punnet. The reason for that is actually I don't like to transplant my tomatoes into a bigger container. Rather just grow them out straight in the punnets here for planting. So a little bit more space really helps. When it comes to seed raising mixes, I just use a store-bought mix, though I like this variety simply because it has a lot less bark. And as you can see, it's quite low bark. So if you can find a low bark variety, it really helps. This is my go-to variety. Get it from my local nursery. And in addition to the seed raising mixes, I like to use vermiculite to cover the seeds once they've been planted out. I like to buy a coarse variety of vermiculite, although I have used Athena grit in the past, but this is perfect for what I'm doing in my patch. To begin with growing my seedlings, filling up the tray with the seed raising mix, just using a ladle, just liberally filling it up. Now at this stage, now that I've filled up my trays, I actually do like to wet the soil now, rather than after I've planted seeds, because I'm actually anxious of dislodging the seeds when I water it later. So just lightly with my hose, just give it a light watering, making sure the soil is quite damp. Now for my seedlings, I'm going to be looking at planting 10 seedlings of Dankia and 12 seedlings of Thunder. A lot of tomato seedlings, but I've got a big family. People will take tomatoes if I get extra seedlings for them. So I'll be growing some for my dad, some for myself, and some for neighbours. The first one I'm going to be planting is Thunder. Just going to be adding 1 seed per cell. And the next one I'm planting is Dankia. Now that I've seeded those trays, they get a covering of vermiculite. I personally like to use vermiculite. I find it's very lightweight and helps the plants to germinate, but you can use soil if you like, but in my context, vermiculite's the way to go. And to apply the vermiculite, it's just a light coating across the tray. And then once I've spread out the vermiculite, just lightly pat it down with my hand. So I just finished planting out those punnets, and you can see they're completely covered with vermiculite and they're good to go. I don't water now anymore, that's it. The water added to the soil earlier on was enough, and that would eventually seep into the vermiculite and wet those seedlings. Now I take my seed trays indoors into my north facing room, and I'll be putting these onto the heat mat to aid in germination. Look, it's starting to warm up here a little bit in Sydney. I am finding tomatoes germinating in my garden at the moment, so I'm not expecting that they're going to need too much heat. And I'm expecting these to germinate in about 7 to 10 days, at which point I will start bringing them outdoors for them to sit in the sun and make sure they don't get leggy, which is really important to get them out early in the sun as soon as they germinate. I need to now go and seed my ox hearts, and so I do the same process, seeds in each tray and then cover it with vermiculite, and they will also go indoors onto the heat mat. And moving on from my tomatoes, I'm going to give you an update on my other spring seedlings that I've been growing out for the last 3 weeks. And if you're just out here at the moment, sunning in the backyard are my capsicums and eggplant seedlings. Up this end here, I've got my Harley capsicum seedlings, got my eggplants, Monacasa, got my Agostini seedlings over there, and on the end here I've got my jalapeno seedlings, Jedi. Now at this stage, the most important part about raising seedlings is to make sure that they are out in full sun as soon as they germinate. Now I find that's the best way to combat any legginess issues. If you don't do that, in my experience, I find that you lose your whole crop. There's no real comeback from it. I always put it out in full sun, as you can see here, and I leave them in there for at least 5-6 hours of daylight, at least a day, and to make sure they get that sun, and it just really helps to green them up and make them grow strong. Now I had to keep these seedlings still on the heat pad during the day because all the seeds had germinated, but in about 3 or 4 days time I won't use that heat pad anymore, and I'll just put them outside in the sun. I do bring my seedlings in the evenings to keep them warm. The heat in the house is warm enough to keep them going, but also to stop the slugs and snails get into them. They have a habit of getting into my seedlings if I leave them out of here overnight. Now, as the seeds are grown in standard store-bought seed raising mix, there is actually no fertilizer in the soil, so the plants, once they germinate, they do need to be applied with additional fertilizer. So at this stage, at this size, I start applying liquid fertilizer once a week to really help them grow. And I'll show you what I'm using and how I do that. Now, in terms of liquid fertilizer you should use, it's got to be something with high nitrogen. These seedlings need a lot of nitrogen at this stage to grow. I personally like to use Power Feed, but happy to use anything with a high level of nitrogen, that 8 to 10%. And now with the fertilizer, I mix it out a weak solution in a watering can, and what I've been doing is just applying the water to the tray, and the idea is to bottom water those seedlings. I'm trying to reduce the amount of disturbances I do to the seedlings themselves. Just with the watering can, just going to start filling up the tray and have the punnets soak in that water. And just to bring you in closer, I filled up the tray to about a third of the way up the punnet, as you can just see right there. And the solution is quite weak. Don't want to go too much in terms of fertilizer at this stage. Now these punnets will sit in this solution for about 15 minutes and really let that water soak into the soils themselves. And I do apply this once a week. I do apply fertilizer once a week. On other days where I want to just water the seedlings, I will just water them in the same method but without the fertilizer. This afternoon I'm over at the north facing side of my garden, and it's time for me to plant out my parsley patch. Now I barely do plant parsley. I usually go get it from my parents, but made the call. This spot that I had earmarked for a while is going to be my new parsley patch. I've just quickly dug over this bed and added a bag of cow manure just to build up the organic matter in this soil. And in addition to this, I want to increase the nitrogen content of this bed. I'm going to add just a half a scoop of blood and bone. Really get that nitrogen levels up here high, because when you're growing herbs like parsley, the more nitrogen the better. It's going to slightly spread this around the bed, and then I'll just mix it in to the topsoil and start getting ready to plant my seeds. Now my family grows a lot of parsley. We make tabbouleh out of it all through the summer, and so we grow large patches of it because we will make multiple salads during the week. So my patch here is going to be quite large. It's in the order of about 800 wide by about 1.2 meters long. So I'm going to get a lot of parsley in this patch. Seeds, Dad's grown his own seeds and he's thankfully saved them for me. I'll just show you, he's given me to me in a bit of a tissue, which is fine, but this is, if you can just see that, fresh seeds. So I will be planting these and they should germinate quite well. These were from last year's parsley patch. So traditionally when we come to planting our patch, we would broadcast the seeds across the whole bed, and as the plants are growing larger and we do our first cut, a lot of those excess plants will die and it will start giving you separations between the seedlings. I'm going to go a bit different this year. I'm actually going to be planting mine in rows to try to minimize the competition from each of the plants. And I'm going to plant the rows lightly. So what I have done is after I've dug over the bed and added my amendments, I've added little trenches in the beds at that 20 centimeter spacings using the back of my rake. And now that's ready to plant. I've got in the order of about 8 to 10 rows in the bed now. Now if I bring it in closer, you can see the trench has been drilled all the way across the bed, and I'll be planting my seeds in between these. I'm planting my seeds. What I'll be doing is finally setting the seeds within the trench. Really being really light with the pour. It's actually quite hard with seeds this small, but I don't want to overfill the trench. And then what I'll do with my fingers, just slightly bring the soil back, just gently bring the soil back to cover those seeds. And then gently pattern it with my hand so to make sure there's proper contact between the soil and the seeds. Now is a good time to plant your parsley. Parsley planted before the shortest day of the year will bolt by the time spring comes along. It responds to the increasing daylight and will bolt. But a little trick is, if you plant it after the shortest day of the year, you'll find that your patch won't bolt as rapidly. It actually won't bolt until next year. Well, that's from our experience with my dad and me over the years. Parsley takes a long time to germinate, more than 14 days, but you'll find that if you're planting around this time in the middle of winter, it may take even longer. It will probably take up to 3 weeks until I start seeing germination in this bat. But what I'll have to do in the meanwhile is make sure I keep it protected from the birds and the ants who will have a tendency to eat the seeds, and make sure to keep it well watered, and I should, fingers crossed, have a fully germinated patch. during the growing season, I'll make sure it's well watered. Parsley love a lot of water and a lot of fertilizer, so I'll be giving them liquid fertilizer after each harvest. And I'm expecting to harvest this patch. I'll be aiming to harvest it fortnightly, once every 2 weeks, and I should be able to harvest it from now till hopefully September next year. Now, to water the seeds in, I like to add a bed sheet and actually double this up, and I lay it across the bed, and the idea is to water onto this. I find that the water can be, just without the cover, the water can be too strong and it will dislodge the seeds. So put a sheet down, double it up, and then gently water onto this sheet, and this will slow down the water and it will just slowly soak into the bed. This is a technique I use on all my leafy greens and all my salad greens, my rocket, my coriander, and now my parsley. Also use this technique on my radishes. I find it works really well as well. For any seeds that are really, really small and that you plant a quantity of, I find this is the best way to water them in. And now that's watered, I leave the sheet on this for the next 7 days, really there to protect the seed bed from birds and ants. And I'll continue watering on this sheet and watering these seeds. And as you can see, that sheet is going to protect the seed bed so no insects can get to it. And if you pull back, you can see that the water has gone through and watered that patch. And as I'm expecting these seeds to start germinating about day 14, about 7 days in, I'll remove the cloth and I'll wait and I'll monitor when those seeds will start germinating. And once they start germinating, start applying more water and maybe a bit of fertilizer after that first week of growth. So thank you very much everyone for joining me in this video. I really appreciate the support. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me either as a comment on this video or via my socials, TikTok and Instagram. Thanks again for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.